They said he was rich beyond imagining. A man of castles and coins, jewels and carriages, velvet gloves and silk sheets, but none ever spoke about the woman he previously married, not the 5 brides who came before. Folks said he parted ways from them at different times in his life. They said the woman he was involved with bid him farewell peacefully and left his castle. That doesn't sound like a problem now, does it? No, it doesn't. However, those women who seemingly left peacefully to enter a new chapter of their lives were never seen again. His name was Lord Vale, though the town called him Bluebeard, for the unnatural shade of his thick, oily, dark beard, a hue that never seemed to shine even in the sun. He was an ugly man with a face that looked like scales or crumpled paper. His breath was so foul it was worse than a monster living in a sewer. Though his appearance never mattered to most, not when he had coin that could buy every land he walked on. He came to call upon 2 sisters, daughters of a fallen noblewoman, offering one of them a life beyond their crumbling walls. His smile was tired but kind. The elder sister refused, but the younger, Ilara, was drawn to his sorrow. The way his eyes lingered on her like she was someone worth keeping. And then they married in haste. Within a fortnight she was whisked away to a grand manor far away from town. A castle of great riches and strange shadows. The servants were scarce and mute. The halls were too wide, the portraits stared too long, and the walls felt like they were whispering dark secrets if one listened closely. Then one of the servants embraced her and bowed at her feet. When Ilara picked him up out of embarrassment, she felt the servant placing something into her shoe. How strange, she thought. Whenever Bluebeard was around, they were happy, laughing, cracking jokes, yet in this moment, merely away from his sight, the servant trembled with uncontrollable fear. When Ilara was getting ready for bed, she kicked off her shoes and saw a folded parchment note inside. So she wasn't imagining things earlier. The servant did in fact put something into her shoe. There were only 2 words written on the note, but those words were enough not only to cause confusion but instill fear into the woman's heart. Get out. That night, when Bluebeard was asleep, she walked in the hallway, hoping the servant was around. The castle had an eerie coldness to it, and not just because of the night. Then the servant poked his head around the hallway. He looked like a spooky shadow of the night, with only his eyes glowing from the reflection of light staring at her. He gestured with his hand for her to come closer and quickly.
"Tell me, madame, have you always been this foolish?"
"Excuse me," replied Ilara.
"You should not be here. You should leave the castle at once. That smile, that kindness, the Louvre, it is only an illusion, it is. I am leaving here tonight. The castle is haunted, madame. I hear the voices when he sleeps. They whisper his name, they do. Boom, boom, against the iron door of the west wing. There are people living in this room. I have all keys in the rooms for the castle except that one. Why is that? Master Bluebeard is hiding something in there. They know it. However, I am no idiot to stay and find those servants. That is what I am, not a detective. I shall wait for you in the courtyard. We shall leave together. Meet me there the next hour."
When Ilara returned to her bedroom, Bluebeard paced around like a grumpy man. He shares his worry and concern with her, but is not exactly love in his voice. Suspicion, yes, but not love. Maybe Ilara felt there was love, but there wasn't. "Were you trying to run away, my love?" No, said Ilara with a little bit of hesitation. The servant meant nothing to her, but why did she refuse to tell Bluebeard about their conversation? Almost like she was scared of what he might do. Almost like whatever the servant had said may have had some truth behind it. "Forgive me, beloved," Ilara replied. "I seem to have gotten lost on my way finding the bathroom. It's my first time seeing such a big castle, let alone living in one." "Nothing to forgive, my love. You rest your beautiful eyes while I patrol the castle to make sure everything is okay." Bluebeard returned after 30 minutes. His hands were cold and wet, and his breathing rather heavy. Within 20 minutes, he fell asleep, snoring like a woodcutter. With 10 minutes remaining of the hour, Ilara snuck out of bed and walked into the hallway. She didn't want to leave Bluebeard, but if the servant was in the courtyard, then maybe his words were indeed true. So Ilara made her way to the courtyard, and what she saw next froze her to her core. The servant who handed her the note was lying in the courtyard, flat on his stomach. His head, however, was slightly elevated from the pitchfork embedded into his skull. 2 men, tall, slender, and dirty, had entered the courtyard at the time. They greeted Madame Ilara with respect and carried the body away. A terrible accident, they said. Bluebeard had already given them coin to take away the body. Lord Vale, wearing his robe, placed his hand over Ilara's shoulder. He was a large man, but it was creepy the way he moved silently, like a shadow that never disappears. He told his wife what a terrible accident this was, that the servant tripped and fell, but in his bag he had belongings of Bluebeard. Indeed, the servant did have some of the most expensive items from the castle in his bag. Now Ilara didn't know who to believe. Was he stealing from Bluebeard? Was he trying to escape and had this unfortunate accident? Was his story about the iron door now just a spooky tale to frighten Ilara? Or was it true? For the last question at least, Madame's suspicion intensified. Next morning, Bluebeard kissed her forehead and said he would be gone for 3 days. He handed her a ring of keys that were iron, ancient, and some with jagged teeth. He told her to forgive him, and the servants are away today. You may go anywhere, open anything, but not the iron door at the end of the west wing. That one is mine. And with that, he was gone. Now, the only thing remaining inside the castle was Ilara, the set of keys, and the suspicion given to her by a now dead servant. Will she heed her husband's request, or will she find out the truth behind the iron door? For 2 days, Ilara wandered the castle. She opened dusty libraries, locked pantries, and trunks filled with dresses in sizes that were too small for her. She tried to ignore the coldness that clung to the west wing. Maybe she was mistaken, but she could hear whispers underneath the floorboards. However, by the 3rd day, she could not resist any longer. She found herself at the forbidden door. The iron key trembled in her hand as she turned it slowly. The door groaned open and a gush of wind full of screams blew towards her. It struck her like a slap to the face, blowing back her hair and knocking her to the floor. Now the air stank of rot and rusted iron as Ilara gagged. Her eyes watered, but then she composed herself. The room was dark, but what little light filtered through the cracks revealed the horrors that lay inside. The walls were splashed in blood, some of it black with age, but the floor was sticky with it. And Bluebeard's previous wives, well, the wives were still there. 5 of them. Their wedding gowns stained with blood and rotting. Their bodies nailed upright against the wall with their wrists bolted in iron cuffs. Some were headless, some with gaping chest wounds. One still had her veil draped over an eyeless face. No, it cannot be, she constantly told herself. Her husband would never do such a thing. But it was too late. The cold wind began circling her like she was a pile of leaves. Her hair would move like a puff from either side as faint whispers stung her ears. Ilara bolted out the room and shut the iron door as quickly as she could. She trembled so much her breathing was heavy, but she locked the room shut, though not unscathed. Her frantic movements had caused a cut on her finger from the steel key as blood covered it like a coating. Whatever has been inside that room has now been freed. She ran to her room and hid under the bed. The night was cold, but she perspired like she ran a marathon. She could see the mist of her breath surrounding her with each exhale, until she was dragged from under. She was flung onto the bed by a gush of wind, but not a wild force of nature, rather a controlled supernatural swoosh that lifted her arms like a scarecrow. Then 5 brides appeared out of thin air, all surrounding the bed that only Ilara could see. Someone might think she was going mad by frantically looking around at nothing. 5 whispers echoed throughout the room all at once. Eerie echoes revealing the true story. of Bluebeard. In his youth, Vale, the man later whispered of as Bluebeard, was no lord at all but the son of a modest butcher. He learned early on how to carve flesh from bone, how to drain a body of blood, and how to make even the ugliest carcass appear fit for a nobleman's table. Plagues came to the land and hardship followed. People starved, and Vale discovered that desperate mouths don't question what simmers inside the pot. Soldiers vanished off roads, beggars disappeared from alleys, and as always, Vale's purse grew heavier. He did not sell beef, nor lamb, nor pig. He sold human flesh dressed and salted, hidden beneath sauces and spice. In this horror, he found not only profit but pleasure. He found his hobby. However, in his early days as a butcher, he slaughtered so many and bled them so often that his beard was never clean. He scrubbed and scrubbed until the skin burned, but the blood had soaked deep into the hair. Red turned to black, black turned to purple, then a dark, sickly blue that never left him. No matter how many times he tried, the stain stayed, like the sins he could never wash away. Then wealth had transformed him. He abandoned the bloody stalls of the markets for velvet halls, raising a castle on the bones of his secret trade. Oh, and the wives, they came one by one, lured by his jewels, his silk, his sheets, his feast that spread wider than any famine could excuse. The first bride had displeased him with her laughter, too shrill and too mocking, and so he silenced it with his blade. One dared to scold him for his temper, and for that she was corrected on the butcher's block. One bride grew curious about the cellar, another wept too often, another refused his bed. Each found themselves dangling on a hook in the iron room, stripped and salted like the animals he once dressed. Their dowries became his estates, their jewels his treasure hoard, and their blood was the motor of his wealth. Yet for all his finery, Bluebeard never ceased to think like a butcher. To him, a wife was not a partner but livestock, to be broken, bled, and consumed when her use had passed. The iron door at the end of the west wing concealed his truest self, the butcher who had made himself a lord, and the slaughterhouse that made him rich. For Bluebeard, he could throw coin and buy loyalty. He could purchase love down the village path. He could multiply trust and affection simply by finding out its price. However, there was one thing he never had come to realize. There are certain things in the world that no amount of money could buy or prevent. For on the fourth day, he returned to the castle unaware his beloved Ilara had opened the iron door, nor the fact that 5 vengeful spirits creeping like shadows against the wall wait for their former husband to return. Bluebeard made his entrance. The storm rode with him, the clouds tearing across the sky as he entered the castle, soaked in rain. His boots echoed throughout the great hall, and his beard dripping water like ink on marble. He seemed to be in a terrible mood. He saw Ilara standing on the stairs but never greeted her with that supposed love and affection. Not even a smile to show how happy he was to see her. She was pale as bone. In her hand the key trembled, and the stain on it dark and crimson. When his eyes fell upon it, his face hardened. No word passed his lips in that moment. He simply drew the blade from his belt, long and curved, and its edge black with old blood. Bluebeard extended his hand. "The keys," he said. Ilara, frightened as ever, handed them over. He paused when he reached the smallest one, and his eyes narrowed. It was slick with fresh blood. "You opened the iron door in the west wing. I thought you were different. You're just as pathetic as the rest." She ran, but he followed. Through the winding corridors, his heavy steps closed the distance. The castle rang with her heavy breathing. However, Bluebeard was unaware that Ilara wasn't just escaping. She was leading him somewhere, for she was under orders. He was a predator in this moment. She wasn't his wife anymore, let alone a human. She became his prey, like a lion hunting a baby deer. Though his demeanor of a once frightening butcher had soon begun to shift. Then the air changed. Cold spread like a sickness. From the iron door at the end of the corridor came whispers, low, broken voices rising and twisting like smoke. And then the door creaked open on its own. First they came crawling, then they floated. 5 women in shredded gowns, skin gray and thin as paper. Their eyes were empty pits of hunger. Their mouths gaped wide, showing teeth like broken glass. They were his brides, and they had waited long enough. The first bride, the laughing one. Her mouth was split so wide like someone cut her smile open. Her teeth were sharp, yellow and broken. Her hair was greasy and clung to her face. Her head hung to one side on a meat hook that still swung slowly. When she opened her mouth, you could hear the sound of laughter, but it was cracked and dry, like old wood snapping. The second bride was the scold. Her face was sharp and hollow, and her tongue hung out, black and swollen, whenever she moved. A deep cut ran down her forehead, splitting her face in two. One eye was loose, like it might fall out. Her dress was stiff with old blood, turning the lace dark and hard. The third bride was the curious one. Her neck was almost gone, head hanging by strings of flesh. She kept tilting it like a broken doll. Her nails were ripped off and nothing but raw, bloody fingertips. Her fingers twitched like they still trying to open that iron door. She had a chain wrapped around her throat that rattled whenever she took a step, but sometimes it rattled even when she wasn't even moving. The fourth bride was the weeper. Her eyes were gone. There were 2 black holes where they used to be, leaking dark tears that never stopped. Her face was pale and smooth like wax except for those tears running down. When she opened her mouth to cry, nothing really came out, just a faint scraping sound like a saw in the distance. The fifth bride was the defiant one and stood proud even now, but both her arms were cut off below the elbows. The ends were ragged with strings of flesh still hanging. Her mouth was sewn shut with hooks, metal glinting whenever she moved. Her eyes burned with hate and her dress dragged in bloody ribbons behind her. Bluebeard dropped his blade, yet he tried to use his size to act tough. But the dead have no fear. They swarmed him with their nails raking in and their jaws snapping. His roar shook the castle, then broke into agonizing screams that would send chills down anyone's spine. Now the walls were soaked with his blood. One of the brides raised a hand in front and a gush of wind pushed Ilara out of the castle entrance, slamming the door shut and keeping her away from danger. She fled into the night and never looked back. Though even in that distance, she could still hear Bluebeard's blood-curdling screams. She could hear his bones snapping and cracking and the sound of flesh being ripped off the bone. When she returned with the village folk, they found only scraps of him on the floor, just like the humans he butchered. Bone, sinew, and the blue-stained beard torn from his face and left like a trophy. Then the castle and its riches had passed onto her name. Few years later, she remarried a simple, hard-working man that never had coin to drop on the ground, though someone she worked with to provide themselves with shelter above their head and food on their table. Ilara never kept the riches from Bluebeard. Instead, she donated all the coin to the grieving families that Bluebeard had exploited during his reign of terror. However, even after decades had passed, no one had inhabited the castle. It became blacked and worn out through age and storms, but folk never dared to enter. For the villagers say that when storms ride over the hills, you can still hear him screaming and the brides laughing in the dark. For the haunting of Bluebeard had just begun.